Hello, my name is Delia and I am the producer of this video. I want to take a moment to share with you from my heart why it is that I am creating this production. Recently, my father passed away from cancer. And although he suffered a lot from having the cancer, it was evident that he suffered almost more from his OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. As his daughter, I have inherited this dominant gene, and it has manifested as Tourette syndrome, which he also had. Ironically, although he was a medical doctor and I am a mental health professional, neither of us was diagnosed with these disorders until about a year ago. And this is not uncommon due to the fact that there is widespread ignorance regarding these neurological disorders and their symptoms. Many people go through much of their lives misdiagnosed or undiagnosed, and they just believe they're simply nervous or anxious. Many experience painful feelings of inadequacy as a result of feeling different and helpless. They feel helpless because they don't understand why they can't control their bodies and their minds. After my father passed away, I decided to combine my psychological knowledge and my dance background to produce this video. My hope is to educate others regarding the symptoms, the causes of Tourette syndrome and associated disorders, and to dispel some long-held myths. Also, through my dance, I demonstrate some of the key stages of grief and loss. Through my membership with the Tourette Syndrome Association, I have discovered that many, many people, after having been diagnosed with Tourette syndrome or OCD or other related disorders, experience very similar feelings that people experience when they lose someone dear to them or lose a job or a home. They experience a strong sense of loss and grief. And I think this is because they realize there is no cure and that this is something they will have until they die, and they will never be normal, whatever that is. Through my dance, I hope to demonstrate how therapeutic accepting and experiencing these feelings are for anyone suffering from TS, or for anyone suffering from any kind of loss for that matter. Most of all, my goal is to spread the message that people with Tourette syndrome come from all races and from all walks of life. Tourette syndrome does not discriminate. We are just as human and just as unique as anyone else. Hi, now it is my pleasure to introduce to you two special guests, Debbie and Vernon Odam. Debbie is the facilitator of the Tourette Syndrome Support Group in Sacramento, and she is also the co-vice president of the Tourette Syndrome Association, the Northern California chapter, and she serves on their board of directors. I want to welcome both of you and thank you for taking the time to come here to share with us your experiences and your knowledge. And I wanted to start off first by asking you, Debbie, just what Tourette syndrome is.
Syndrome is an inherited neurological genetic disorder, and some of the symptoms are motor movement. A lot of the symptoms are motor movement, such as ticking, grimacing, blinking your eyes, sniffing, grunting. There's quite a few of them. Vocal tics are also involved, although coprolalia, which is when they sensationalize on TV, which is the cursing that people do, sometimes barking, that is 30% of the population have that of Tourette people, and it's not the most common symptom. The most common are the sniffing, the snorting, things like that.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about what age does this usually start? And
Well, we actually noticed it in our child at age 4, and we weren't sure at that time that it was inherited, but as we discovered, it was. And the age of onset usually is between 7 and 21 years of age.
How does it affect children to have Tourette syndrome?
It's very distracting for them in the classroom. They're trying to hold in their tics. They're trying to hold in attention deficit problems that they have with it, obsessive compulsive problems that are associated with it. And it's just, it's hard for them. It's very hard.
Now, I know OCD is an associated neurological disorder. Can you give us, Vernon, an idea of what is OCD and what are some of its symptoms?
Well, OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, and speaking from my personal experience, it's a matter of doing certain things compulsory and obsessively, and it's usually associated with counting. That's a very common thing with people, to count the number of squares that are on a sidewalk when you're walking, or certain rhythms. There's maybe washing hands, or opening and closing doors numerous times. Some people have more serious OCD, such as worrying that they drove over somebody, and they go back and forth up and down the street to make sure that they didn't run over somebody or something.
Oh, wow. So some of these symptoms can be quite debilitating, it sounds like.
Debilitating is, I think, the most appropriate word that comes to mind in association with that. You nailed it.
I've heard from some psychologists that Tourette syndrome and OCD are caused by psychological problems and trauma, possibly. In the
No.
past. I see you shaking your head there.
No. Not a psychological problem. They've been doing scientific research for a number of years now. They have actually brain donors that donate their brains for scientific research, and they have actually located a few of the genes involved in it. They have pretty much proven that it is an inherited neurological disorder. It is not a psychological problem, although psychological problems can occur because of the Tourette's, and people end up in therapy and with psychiatrists because of the problems that they've dealt with all their life dealing with their Tourette's going undiagnosed.
It's almost more like a side effect of having a disorder
Right.
that's so little
Right, exactly.
understood.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I notice you, Vernon, seem pretty normal. I would never guess that you have Tourette syndrome. And is this a common phenomenon that you can see someone on the streets who has the disorder and you never occur to you?
Yes, it is, because most people are very aware, conscientious, and even embarrassed at demonstrating whatever tics that they have, some very subtle and some more severe. And so people learn to, as I've learned to, internalize the tics with thoughts and sequences of counting things, and also there's ways of concealing or camouflaging your tics. So people will do a lot of shoulder shrugging or any number of body movements that anybody would look at and see as perfectly normal, but in reality they're tics. So there's things that people do, and they are ticking, and somewhat it takes one to know one. So when I see people doing certain behavioral movements, very often it puts up a red flag that that person could very likely have Tourette syndrome.
What do you mean by internal, like, tics? What does that mean? Because this looks, you can see that.
With mine, I have counting. There's always something around that I can count. And so we could be sitting here and I'm calmly staring at that cup, and I'll be counting how many letters there are, or I could be thinking about Tourette syndrome association. and there's a rhythm. Tourette, 2 syllables. Syndrome, 2 syllables. Association. So I build something, construct this rhythm, 2 syllables on the top, 2 in the middle, 5 as a base. And there's just something gratifying about that. Sounds like total nonsense to many people, except those who can relate because they themselves have Tourette's or OCD. Or
It's quite a complicated endeavor. That takes a lot of
it can be.
time.
I remember doing that as a child, and that's interesting when he says that, because I think that's what made me a good speller. Because I would break everything up into syllables, and I'd memorize this part and that part and that part. But the repetitive part of the OCD helped me remember the words. So that, that's one of the positive things about having some of the symptoms of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, that's associated with Tourette's, is your ability to really focus in on things that are of interest to you. We don't understand why the brain does that, but people that have Tourette's, most of them say that if they're working on a project or at work, they don't tick at all. It just happens when they're either relaxed at home or stressed. Too much stress can cause it, and relaxation also causes it, because the stress of the day, it comes out when they're relaxed at home, and then all the tics come out even twice as bad.
We know in particular of 2 surgeons in the medical profession. They're actual surgeons. And of course, when they're doing surgery, they don't and they can't afford to be operating if their tics are a problem.
Right.
But they're able to put them on the back burner, so to speak, for a period of time. And a lot of times with people, with myself, speaking for myself, if I'm in a social situation, I have to not tick, and I'm maintaining. It's a matter of controlling and actually management. You don't have a cure, but you manage as best you can. And this is another thing, is I have ADHD, and I just spaced off on what I was saying. And that's a frequent occurrence.
That's a good example.
That's great. We've got live examples today.
I guess it wasn't important.
I wanted to know, you're mentioning there's no cure.
Right.
How about any kind of treatment available? Any medications or herbs or any kind of things?
That would be, Debbie's territory to.
Medications definitely help a lot of people. Prozac is a real good antidepressant, and Zoloft and a lot of the antidepressants help the OCD, help calm the thoughts that can also lead to depression. For the tics, there are a number of medications out there, but every person's an individual, and the medications are prescribed according to that person. One person can't tolerate what another person can tolerate. The doses have to be varied. It's real touch and go in trying to figure out what's right for each person. As far as herbs and vitamins, yes, they do help. It just depends on the person's preference. Some of the milder cases of Tourette's, if it's not interfering with your life, you don't necessarily need to be on medication. I think that's up to the parent of the child or the adult as to what they want to be on, if anything at all.
I've heard that for a lot of people with mild cases who don't feel that the side effects are really worth taking the medication, that movement seems, because it is a movement disorder, that movement seems to really help with the symptoms.
Kind of counteract the symptoms. Yeah, it does. And there are a lot of musicians that play drums, play piano, such as yourself, that plays piano beautifully. That helps a lot to
have an outlet.
To have a creative outlet. Creative outlet. I think that everybody, including Vernon, who's an artist, they get into their work, something that really is a creative aspect of them.
Focusing in.
And then they can focus in on that, and it helps the tics too.
Are there any famous individuals, living or not, that have TS or OCD?
Oh, yeah, there's quite a few. There are a lot of sports figures, Jim Eisenreich of the Philadelphia Phillies, and Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf of the Sacramento Kings. They both have Tourette's.
Spuds Webb
Spuds
used to
Webb.
be on the Kings. He had Tourette syndrome. And there's one other person, a basketball player with Tourette syndrome, and I don't know his name.
It's pretty interesting. They're all into movement.
They're all into
I don't know if
movement.
there's some kind of correlation there, but
Right, Mozart,
Um,
famous piano player. Is that correct?
famous composer. Wow.
Composer.
Yeah, he had Tourette syndrome.
Mhm.
And also Samuel Johnson.
Samuel Johnson.
Yes.
They're finding, as they go back in literature, finding more and more famous people that do have Tourette syndrome, yeah.
Wow. Well, that sure sheds a different light to the whole issue. It's not, there are positive things associated. It's
Oh,
not
yeah,
a disorder
yeah.
that will keep you down forever.
Yeah.
On the
Oh,
contrary,
no,
it's-
no, you can be very successful if you put your creative abilities to use and use it to your benefit.
What is your story, Vernon? Would you care to share just a little bit? Maybe, I know we haven't talked too much about children, and this can be very damaging to a child's self-esteem, especially if it's been misdiagnosed or undiagnosed. What was it that you went through, maybe before you were diagnosed, and then at the moment and after?
I can remember, as best as my recollection takes me back, I'm pretty sure I was 7 years old, give or take a year. And when I first started noticing my nervous habits, and I had a father who was somewhat controlling with his discipline, so I would get criticized and ridiculed because of it. And at a very early age, I began my attempts to internalize, to hide. And that's they're two words with the same meaning in a way in that aspect. Internalizing is my way of hiding tics, and I noticed my idiosyncrasies, neurological, but they're just nervous habits, is what I called them at the time.
But because you were able to control it at times, people couldn't understand why you
Yeah.
couldn't always control it, right? So they
Right,
thought it
right.
was a...
I would be told to stop twitching, stop grunting, stop squaring up my mashed potatoes on my plate, organizing things. And that's, I think that in my situation, what made my experience very confusing is I've since been diagnosed, what was it, how long ago? 11 years?
It's been about 15 years since you've been diagnosed with Tourette's. He was
It's a
diagnosed
long-
at 35, he's 46 now. So.
Yeah. So I went 35 years not knowing. And what made it confusing is I had Tourette syndrome, OCD, and ADHD. And those three things were working, and there's different areas of each, but yet there's crossovers, areas with each one that are similar to the others where they crossed over. And it's really difficult to differentiate what's going on at what time.
Wow. Oh.
So,
Especially for a kid living in a world
and then growing
that
up through
has-
school. I think education was probably my most difficult obstacle to deal with, because it was very difficult to study, to read, to concentrate and focus and maintain my focus and my concentration at times when I needed to. And I had a hard time studying because of that. So it makes things difficult. It can potentially make things difficult. Unless somebody has an outlet like Mahmoud has his with basketball. And
I bet that's not at all uncommon that you go 35 years without even
No.
knowing what it is you have
no, it's not.
and feeling this maybe helplessness as to why it is that my body and my mind are doing things I can't control
Yeah.
for long anyways.
I've talked with a number of people with it that have had it for quite a while, actually, and their stories are similar. The embarrassment and the attempts to conceal, to hide their symptomata of the causation of the Tourette syndrome or whatever it is that they have. Some people have just OCD or just ADD or just ADHD, but usually it seems that most people have,
Most people with Tourette's have.
yeah, most people with Tourette's have other associated neurological disorders as well.
So it's almost a package deal. It's
Yeah.
rarely just,
Yeah, I
so there's
personally.
many genes involved, it sounds like.
Yes, yeah, there are, and I haven't personally met anyone that just has Tourette's.
Hmm.
You know, just has tics and nothing else.
Interesting.
So it seems that it is a package deal most of the time.
Okay. Well, are there any other issues, anything else you would like to share before we close out?
No.
Maybe?
I think we've covered most of it.
Yeah, I just like to think that awareness and knowledge and education, receiving knowledge about this becomes known, and it is becoming more, the awareness of it is becoming, it's better.
Right. Now, actually, I did have one more thing I wanted to throw out. In keeping with this video, a lot of the dances that are going to be portrayed deal with grief and the stages of loss that many people experience when they lose somebody or they discover they have a serious illness or whatever kind of loss that they've experienced. And I've noticed, being a member of the Tourette Syndrome Association, that it seems that a lot of people with these disorders, when they first get diagnosed, and even after and even before, I mean throughout the whole course of the illness, they experience a sense of grief, especially when they find out that this is what they have and there's no cure,
Yeah.
and they'll never be normal again. Is this something that you've just...
Yeah, it's somewhat of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you're relieved to know that you identify what it is that you've had.
There's a
And that,
name.
in a way, solves some of the mystery that it now has a name. You can look back on the history of research done on it, and there's somewhat of an education behind it, but yet at the same time, you find out that there's no cure for it, there's no way of making it go away, and that what it is that you have, you're going to have for the rest of your life. And at times it can be downright depressing with a lot of people, but it's...
Something you have to learn to live with.
Yeah, just have to learn to live with it.
I think that I went through that, maybe close with this, with my children, when I found out and I realized that they had Tourette syndrome also. I went through a grieving process. You know, I've cried and gone through the whole emotional grieving process.
So not only for yourself,
for the child,
the whole family.
Yeah,
it sounds
and
like.
it's not a grieving of my own sadness as much as it is the grieving for the child of the things that they're going to have to deal with, the obstacles along the way. But somewhere along the line, they're going to find their niche in society, and usually it's probably going to be through their creative outlet of some sort that they have developed along the way, or are born with.
Well, thank you. I want to thank
Welcome.
both of you so much for taking the time to come here and sharing from your heart very personal things.
You're
You're
welcome.
welcome. Thank you.
For further information on Tourette syndrome and associated disorders, or if you would like to make a donation, send to Tourette Syndrome Association, 42-40 Bell Boulevard, Bayside, New York, 11